Hi everyone. Uh, on behalf of our Russian Python Week team, I'm glad to welcome you at our next book club session. Let's dive into a short story for the beginning. A plane crashes on a desert island. There are only a few survivors, 3 Spanish people, 3 French people, and an Englishman. 6 months later, one of the Spanish men has killed the other and is now living with the Spanish woman. All the 3 French people have decided to live together, and the Englishman is still waiting to be introduced to the others. My mom says I'm funny. I'd like to introduce Harry Percival, a Python programmer, a book author, and a constant source of Alan's quotes. Hey, Harry, how do you do today?
I'm very good, Slava. Thank you very much for having. Hello, all Russian friends. Welcome to my house. I'm in my garden house at the moment. You can see his storage. And over there is Rob. He's building a new bathroom. Okay, so здравствуйте, Rob.
Hey.
Outside is the garden. There's some like little children running around making trouble. So I can't promise it will be 100% quiet. But we can try and have a nice interview anyway. So thank you again for having me, Slava. Thank you. Thank you, Russian Python Week.
Nice, Harry. The only good topic I know to talk about with an Englishman is the weather. Google weather forecasts. It's pretty sunny today in London, right?
Oh yeah. No, it's been really nice. Huh? I went on a holiday for a long time in Ireland, where I made my little video I sent to everyone with the waterfall. And it was normal temperature there. Came back to London, it was very cold at nighttime. And now suddenly we have 3-4 days of summer again. So we're happy here, yeah. How is it in Russia? Where are you, in Moscow?
Great. Here in Moscow, it's pretty cold, and cloudy. But the weather is still good, and I'd like to have some walk after our meeting.
You wear long sleeves or a t-shirt?
Long sleeves.
Yeah.
Definitely. Luckily, today there's another good topic to discuss. Here we have a lot of Russian Pythonistas willing to talk about your book test-driven development in Python. So, Harry, here's your time. You're welcome.
Thank you, Slava. Well, sometimes people ask me, how did it all start? Why did I write this book about test-driven development, and how did it all happen? And I remember when I was first learning Python, I learned from a book called Dive into Python, which is also, it's been made again recently with Dive into Python 3. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I've heard.
So Dive, yeah. This was maybe in 2008. So I learned it, and I learned Python, I learned dictionaries, I learned strings, I learned lists, and then like it explains all the different features of the language. And then maybe chapter 14, he says unit testing. And I go, okay, unit testing. And he explains how to make a Roman numeral calculator or translator. So you can make I is 1, and II is 2, and IV is 4. And you want to make this piece of this program, and he says, it's much easier if you write some tests. And so he shows, use the unit test module, and if you write tests, then coding is much easier, and you can do maybe even test-driven development. And I read it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting. That sounds like a really good idea. Something that you should do. You should do, like, maybe like flossing your teeth, right, every day. So I then, of course, ignored it completely and forgot all about it. And, I thought already I'd been doing programming, in Python for 3 weeks. And I thought it was pretty hot shit. I thought it was pretty good. I don't need tests. I'm fine. Just going to build a Django app, and it's going to have a few pages. I don't need testing. It'll be okay. I can check it. And you know what? I was fine. It was fine at first. in the beginning, if you have a small application, it was easy. I can just check if it works. I go on this page, I go on that page, I go code, models.py, code, views.py, make a change. And like week number 2, now I have like 8 different models, and I have like 12 different views, and I've got like multiple inheritance in my forms, and I'm going like, well, maybe I changed this here, and oh no, okay, I've overridden it there, so that's broken, so I'll undo that and maybe change this one over here. And like pretty soon, like everything became very painful. Like I didn't know what depended on what. I was scared of making any changes. I couldn't do refactoring, and the code became a mess. So that's when I got to my first real job, and they were doing test-driven development, I was kind of like ready to learn the lesson because I'd done it the wrong way, and I'd got into the pain of the wrong way. Maybe you experienced something similar, Slava.
Yeah, it was.
So I did that, and I went to a company called Python Anywhere, which is a Python hosting platform, still going. And they were doing extreme programming, which is like an agile methodology, like the old school one, where they do 100% pair programming, 2 people all the time, and 100% TDD. And I was ready to learn the lesson, but I still complained about everything. I was like, what? You have like functional tests and unit tests? Oh, that's too much testing. Or they would like, code and make tiny little changes and run the test. Tiny little change, run the test. Tiny little change, run the test. And I was like, come on, you can't be serious. We could skip to the end a little bit. And they're like, no, Harry, let's do it properly. So I complained, and I was grumpy about it, and I was difficult, but they were like very patient with me. And eventually I understood like all the lessons, and I saw the wisdom of the approach. And so after a couple of years of this, I decided to write a book about it and share the knowledge.
Great. Harry, I have an announcement for our audience in Russian for a minute. Ребят, все, кто нас смотрит, кто подключился, не стесняйтесь, задавайте вопросы в чате. В конце обязательно перейдем к ним, и Гарри на них ответит. Yeah, I'm back here. I asked the audience to ask questions, so we can answer it in short time. So let's continue. Harry, we can continue.
I lost you for a minute there. I have a little bit of bad internet connection, maybe.
I can hear you.
Okay.
It's okay, yes.
What were you doing? Was it advertising?
No. I asked the audience to ask questions, to prepare questions for you.
Great. So that's the story of how the book started. And then the next thing that's like famous about the book is that it sometimes is called the goat book. How do you say goat in Russian?
Goat, yes.
Yeah, how do you say that in Russian?
I think we say goat book. Yeah,
okay. Well, so we have in the book, we have the testing goat, and I like to explain like what is the testing goat. It was a little joke that happened at the Python conference in America for a few years before I really learned about it. And then like it was a little meme that was pretty much ready to die, and I decided to bring it back to life. I think people would do a lot of pictures of cats in their presentations, and then someone said cats are boring, let's change, we'll do goats. And so all the testing talks had goats in like 2013 or something. But anyway, what is the testing goat? I imagined it in my head as like a little bit like, in a cartoon, like a Warner Brothers cartoon or Mickey Mouse, where
sure.
like maybe an angel comes up on one shoulder and says, oh, do the right thing. And on the other shoulder, there's like a devil going, ha, 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 no, let's get drunk and party. It's like that. Like the testing goat comes up here, just it has like only a very niche set of concerns, just cares about testing. So it comes up here and goes, do your tests first, man, tests first. So that's the testing goat. And it's like a kung fu master, like a karate master, like Master Splinter or something, or from a kung fu film. He's unreasonable.
Yeah.
he's grumpy and unreasonable, and he wants you to do it the hard way. Yes, you must do it like that. So testing Go, because TDD is a strange thing, and it's not natural. You need practice. So I imagine this kind of kung fu master. People talk about code katas and code dojos. It's the same thing. Like, you have to practice. And so this is my imaginary kung fu master. Yeah, testing Go.
Good. We have questions from our audience. The first is, you said about your second book, right? You are working on. So the question is, how this second book connected with previous book, how the ideas evolved?
Yeah, good question. So towards the end of the book, the first book, I start to talk about different kinds of tests. You can have low-level unit tests, little tests. You can have maybe integration tests where you check integration with an API, or integration with a file system, or integration with a database, like one at a time. And then you have like high-level tests, like functional tests or end-to-end tests, where you test the whole system maybe. And I start to talk in the book about, what's the right balance? How many should I have? And I have this idea of like test pyramid. And I also talk a little bit about, using mocks and making your unit tests like perfectly isolated versus, mixing them a little bit, and like the compromise of the Django, test client. And I started talking in the book about the trade-offs. You have some tests that run very fast, but if they're just unit tests, maybe they don't give you enough confidence that it really works. And then you have some tests that are slow, but if they pass, you're sure that everything works. But maybe sometimes they're unreliable. And so, and I sort of vaguely said, well, like, you want maximum unit tests and minimum functional tests, but it's hard to find the right balance of reliability and speed and confidence the code is correct. And I didn't really have any good answers for that. I just said, here's the trade-offs, figure it out. And I think that the second book is about finding some possible answers. And it's about choosing architecture patterns, choosing ways to structure your code that specifically that allow you to have maximum coverage from unit tests and the minimum number of end-to-end and functional and integration tests. And you do it by designing your application in such a way that, like, you have the maximum complexity in a isolated kind of unit testable part of your code. And then you move out the bits that need integration testing and functional testing, like you separate them out. And it's not easy to do that. And like, if you start with Django, it's like often that takes you down a path where it gets harder and harder. And so, yeah, I was lucky in my new job to meet someone who's an expert in these sorts of topics, a software architect called Bob. So he's my co-author on the book. And he taught me all about it. He taught me his ways of doing it. And we basically translated some ideas from the C# and Java world, the kind of like enterprise software development world, where like people in Java have done this sort of stuff for years. And we tried to do it in Python. And we actually tried to do it nicely, like not just make Java code into Python code, because that's horrific, but like do it in a Pythonic way, So use nice features like context managers and decorators and yeah. So that's it. Yeah. So the testing angle, and like, how do we make the architecture of our software help us to get the best kinds of tests, is the question I'm trying to answer in the second book.
Great. If we talk about architecture, the question is, what tools are missing to work with architecture in Python right now? What do you think?
Tools are missing to work with architecture.
Yeah. What makes it hard to build a good application with good architecture? How do you think?
Well, I mean, I guess the common answer here is that when you have a framework like Django, and I'm not saying Django is bad, right? Django is great. And the reason it's great is because it helps you solve a lot of problems, and it helps you make like working software very quickly. So it encourages a lot of people to go for something like that. And then sometimes your requirements outgrow that framework, and you find that Django helps you to do HTML forms, and it helps you to do database queries, and it helps you to maybe automatically generate your form against your database schema. And if most of, like when you're coding, if most of the problems you need to solve is HTML forms and database queries and transforming data from the internet into a database table, like if you have a fairly simple website over the top of a database, like we say CRUD system, then Django's going to help you a lot. But the problem comes when now your main problem is not HTML forms and database. I mean, you always have those problems, but you actually find most of your time, if it changes and it becomes about business logic, it becomes about understanding complex requirements and a complex problem that requires an advanced model, and a model that changes quite frequently, and a model that might change at a different speed from the way you want to change your database. Then Django starts to get in the way, and it's the fact that you're kind of closely coupled to your ORM and to your database all the time means that actually, your tests become slow and it becomes hard to evolve things. So it's not a direct answer to the question, but I think we've all grown up around Django and rapid software development in the Python community. And it means sometimes that we're kind of stuck with that, and that we don't have the opportunity to throw it all away and start from scratch and try something a little bit different where we put the business logic first and add Django, yeah, maybe, but add it second as a helper rather than as the skeleton of your whole application.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Harry. We have an interesting question from Kira. She's asking, what is the connection between TDD and software design?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, good question. So one thing I talked about in the link between the two books is that sometimes you can design your software in order to make testing more easy. But sometimes it's the other way around. And so I think the original promise of TDD is more that if you write your tests first, you can let your design evolve naturally over time. I do a code kata, a code exercise of that Roman numeral calculator. And if you do test first programming for a Roman numeral calculator, you can come up with solutions that you would probably never do if you would start just from the code. Because by starting with the test, you just say, right, it has to do this and this and this, and you can evolve it very slowly, going, okay, fine, I'm going to make a calculator that just does I plus I equals II. Yeah, and then I can do one, and then if I have add I and I to make II, right, and that's the test, I can just go, well, I'll just use string concatenation, I'll just literally use string 1, string 2, add them together without converting to numbers. And you can evolve a Roman numeral calculator that never uses integers, it turns out. You can do it with pure string manipulation. And that's never I think that's an example of a design that can emerge from TDD, which is not the kind of design you would choose if you were just building the software without thinking about tests. So by making you focus on what the system needs to do from the outside perspective, it can maybe leave you more free to come up with new solutions on the inside. And by making you work in slow sort of incremental steps, it can also make sure that you don't get into the trap of Yagni, the trap where you go, oh, okay, well, make a Roman numeral calculator, so it better do addition and multiplication, and what if I get Russian characters, I better handle Cyrillic Roman numerals, if that's even possible. It's not possible. Yeah, absolutely. And it can lead you to some unexpected designs, some choices that you wouldn't choose naturally if you just did code first instead of test first. And it can also, like I have a talk from PyCon last year called Stop Using Mocks, where I say, if you don't use mocks and you have to make your own mocks, like build an actual fake class, then the process of writing like tests and writing fakes gives you feedback about the IPI of the thing you're faking. And so if you've made something very complicated, it's very hard to make your own fake, your own mock for it. And so it's going to like make you think, oh, maybe I should make this simpler. Like you make yourself feel some of the pain of your API design, API choices. Yeah.
Simpler, you mean better?
Yeah. Yes. And so sometimes when you find yourself writing a test and writing the test is very painful, maybe it's just very complicated logic, but actually maybe it's because the way you've structured your application is painful. And it makes you think, hang on, these tests are like awful to write. What if I change the structure of the application, and then the test would be easier and maybe also the application would be nicer.
Isn't that boring, Harry, to write one test, another test, another test? How do you deal with it?
You mean like, how do you deal with the fact that...
it's kind of boring, right?
Is it boring? Yeah.
I don't know. How do you feel about it?
No, it's not. It's very exciting.
Really?
No. Well, I don't know.
Maybe some tricks.
I stopped thinking it like that. I mean, I guess I'm so... I've been doing it for so long that I just, I forgot to give a value judgment to it. But you can spend a bit of time making your tests look nice, and you want to be proud of them. And they're not the same kind of code as application code. They're more repetitive.
So you value it as high as production code, right?
Well, I throw away
same quality.
Yeah, it's a different kind of quality, right? In my tests, I'm gonna be happy to have more repetition, not too much, but sometimes if I have 3 tests and they're quite similar, like test, a blue car with a diesel engine and what else, like round wheels, I don't know, versus test a red car with an electric engine on a motorway. And if you're building an application code, you're tempted to refactor and extract some helpers and remove duplication. Whereas in tests, actually, the duplication is good. If you can see the difference between each test on one screen, that's maybe a good thing. But you certainly want something from your tests, right? You want them to be easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to change. And that's difficult, right? Like if you just write the tests without thinking about it, you'll come back 2 months later and have to change something, and it will be painful. So it would be boring if it was easy, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. The question from Nikita. He'd like to ask about functional programming. What do you think about it?
I'm reading a famous book at the moment, SICP, the Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. It's an old MIT textbook for introduction to programming, but also functional programming, because it's Lisp. It's a scheme book. And I tried to read it once before and didn't get very far. I did 20% of the book. It's a good bit. So you have to ask me the same question again in about 4 months when I finished, okay?
Great. Come back here and I'll ask you.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert in functional programming, but I think you can see some of the ideas from functional programming. Like maybe, what if you were to make all your objects immutable? And at first you go, well, that's crazy. Like I can't change any state. And then when you try it, you go, okay, some bits of this are crazy and stupid, but other bits make it really nice. And I think there's some ideas that are coming around in the Python world, which we wouldn't have if we didn't have functional programming suggesting them. And sometimes they're good. And sometimes it makes your code like an unreadable, horrific mess that only functional programmers can understand and not like normal human beings, and everyone hates you. So it's like everything, there's a trade-off.
Great. So you told you read a book right now. Harry, do you have any books that have inspired you greatly? Can you share something?
Yeah. So in programming books, the testing book I always recommend is the one by Kent Beck. So Kent Beck is one of the original inventors even of extreme programming, of the Agile movement. He's one of the original Smalltalk programmers. And he wrote a book called TDD by Example. And it has 3 big sections. The third one is in Python. And it's a real insight into how he thinks about TDD. And it's very much about his brain, you know, like it's psychology almost. And he talks about how TDD takes the stress out of programming, you know. And he says that when he has a big problem and he doesn't know how to solve it and he's freaked out, he goes, well, okay, I don't know how to fix this, but I think I can maybe write a test. So I'll write a test first, and then I can relax a bit. At least I've done that, and maybe I can solve a little bit, you know. And he talks about how, you know, the difficult thing about programming is you have to be smart. And that's nice, like first thing in the morning when you've had breakfast and you've had coffee. But in the evening you get tired, or like, yeah, maybe it's really early in the morning and you're sleepy on Monday. You know, it's hard to be smart all the time. And he says it's nice to have tests because they just give you a backup. He talks about you know, there's a metaphor where he talks about taking water out from a well. There's maybe some difficult words here, but like, you know, you have a bucket, you throw it in a big hole in the ground called a well in 100 years ago, and you pull up on a rope to get the water out, right? And so like, it's a small bucket and a short rope, it's easy. But if it's a big bucket and a long way down, like you start, you're like, whoa, here we go. And then like 30 seconds in, you're like, woof, okay, I'm getting tired now. And you get more and more tired. And eventually you're like, you let go, and you like go back down to 0. And that's a bit like when you're like refactoring with no tests, you know, you're like, oh, code. Oh, then change this, change that, change this. Oh, what did I change now? Oh, where did that code come from? Wait, I don't remember, this bit doesn't work anymore. And you've like lost track, and you basically have to git reset -- hard and give up.
It becomes extremely difficult.
Yeah. And so he says, in the metaphor, he says, tests is a bit like having a ratchet. A ratchet is a mechanism where we put the rope through it and we pull, and it goes click, 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 click. And when you let go, the rope stays. You can only pull in one direction, you know? It's like saving your progress.
Interesting association. Thank you. I know the next question. How do you like to rest from work? Except beer.
Well, I have 2 small children now. So work is my rest from children. I know a lot of people go, oh, Monday morning, God, back to work. And when I'm Monday morning, I'm like, hooray, finally, I can relax. I'm getting rid of my children. So yeah, it's the opposite. Programming is relaxing for me. Like the hard work comes like at 6 o'clock.
So we have another question from our audience in chat. Vladimir is asking, how do you combine TDD alongside the Agile practices within really short Scrum iterations? I mean, when tests become old and useless earlier than the target core is ready, and it's appeared to be a bit different than it's planned in the beginning.
You're saying the question is because requirements change so quickly You've written a bunch of tests saying it should be like this and this and this, and then 2 days later it's like, oh, okay, I made them all wrong.
Yes. How to combine TDD and short agile iterations?
And I guess I've not found this to be a problem. So I wonder what I'm doing differently from our friend asking the question. Maybe it's about having fewer tests, so like doing it more slowly. And maybe it's about having the right kinds of tests. So if you, one trade-off is, let's suppose, you have a module and it uses 3 different functions, and the 3 different functions use 5 different classes. You could choose to have 5 tests, 5 different test files for each different class, and 3 different test files for all 3 functions, and 1 test file for the module. Or you could maybe have 1 test file that tries to test everything all in one go. And the advantage of the having lots of small test files is each file is simpler. Whereas if you just have 1 big file and test everything at the high level, those tests are more complex. But the disadvantage of lots of small ones is that when you decide that instead of having 3 functions and 5 classes, you want to have 2 functions and 7 classes, you have to throw almost everything away. Whereas if you just have if you try and have much more high-level tests, then hopefully it's less likely that your top-level APIs are going to change versus wanting to change the low-level details. So in my second book, I talk a bit about this in chapter 5, like high-level versus low-level tests, or high gear versus low gear. So that's one possible solution. And then the other one is about trying to, you can, maybe it's about trying to make your agile iterations, like the way you code, smaller as well. And if you have short iterations, then you break the functionality you're building down into really small pieces as well. And don't make the mistake of building loads of things too quickly, I guess. Try and build in smaller chunks, and maybe it's less likely that you're going to need to change all of them.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. And the next question is how TDD is connected with specific features, product features, and decomposition.
Decomposition?
Decomposition, right.
I'm not sure I understand.
So we have specific features in our product development, and we decompose it in some way. And how we apply TDD with these decomposed specific features.
Maybe it's a bit related to the previous question then, or the answer I was giving about choosing high-level and low-level tests.
I think yes, they are connected.
Yeah.
Great. So the next question from our chat, from Maxime. Is it necessary to have 100% test coverage?
Yes.
Short, straight question. Yes.
No. I've never asked myself the question about the percentage of test coverage until I found myself collaborating with some people who didn't do TDD. And I think it's because the way I was taught it is that you never write any code unless you have a test. And so I was pretty sure my coverage was 100% already. And then if I had exceptions, then they were exceptions, and I was happy with them. I made up that rule. Like, it's hard to test code you use to deploy servers, for example, right? So you might not write tests for that. And then, so there's two answers to that. Like if you have a particular methodology, if you're following the kind of the TDD way, and you're never writing code without writing tests first, then you will get 100% coverage on the parts of the code that you follow that rule for. And then I think naturally you find types of code where that's not going to work, like where that's not a type of code that you can test in that way. And so you'll make your own exceptions. I think that's all right. But if you're proceeding, if you're doing test first, I think you'll usually end up in the right place. If you're like quite careful about your rules of like not copy and pasting big chunks of stuff, and not like maybe bending the rule and we'll do tests later for this one, or I'm going to skip to the end, then you'll get your coverage naturally. So yeah, you should have 100% coverage when you want 100% coverage.
Okay. So I'm interested in one question, Harry. How do you usually combine writing a book and your work, your main work?
Well, for both books, I've usually taken a bit of time off. So I would go maybe take one morning every week off work and ask my boss if that's okay. Because, like for a while I was writing a book evenings and weekends, and that's very tricky. Especially once you start and if you have a family. So yeah, what I found is it was much easier if you have specific time that's 100% for the book, and it's like every week.
So you usually turn into monk mode when you write a book? You have separate room? I don't know.
Yeah. Like at least it's nice to try and have some time uninterrupted. But yeah, if you have children, it's impossible. I mean, writing a programming book is not the same as writing, a novel or a science fiction or a romance. Like I don't have to imagine characters and like think about, like the plot. I can you can make a plan, and you can do one chapter at a time, and you can do little rewrites. So I think I don't have to be like Stephen King or like what's his name in The Shining, like Jack Nicholson, and kill my whole family. It's not necessary. I can do it in little sort of half-hour, 1 hour chunks.
Okay, I know. And Harry, what do you think about translations of your book? And the quality of the translations?
Yeah. So my book that I know of has been translated into Chinese, Polish, and Brazilian, like official translations. And then a friend of mine from Ukraine told me that he'd seen a Russian one, and he said it's not very good. Now, he's from Ukraine, so his Russian is like not Russian, right? So I don't know whether it's true or not. And I don't know if it's an official translation or maybe an unofficial one. So unfortunately, I can't tell. If you make a French translation, I can speak French, so I could have read it and tell you. But I don't know. Hopefully, it's maybe easier to translate a technical book than it is to translate Stephen King. And so maybe even if the translation is a bit like this, you can still learn. Maybe it doesn't matter too much.
Okay, thank you. And the interesting question is, how long did it take to write your book? How long it was?
Yeah, both of them, they took about 18 months, a year and a half. I think that's true for both. Maybe the second one was a little bit faster. And I think both of them, we planned to do it in 1 year, and it took 18 months. It's a long time. So if someone wants to write a book, you know, yeah, I encourage you to do it, but it's not fast. And it's a lot of hard work, and there's no effing money.
Do you usually have some planning?
You usually maybe plan some idea of what each chapter is going to contain, like at least the title of each chapter and some structure like that. And then it changed a bit. Like in my first book, I had, you know, when I finished, I did it a bit like agile development. You know, I would try at every point to like have something that I could ship. And we just ran out of time. Like when I got to the end, I still had like 5 or 6 more chapters I could have done. But, you know, my editor went, look, it's been a long time now. I think, you know, you've got 20 chapters. Let's ship it. And so, yeah, similarly for the new book, yeah, there's at least 2 more chapters I could write. But at some point you have to say, come on, let's ship it. And yeah, like I said, there's not very much money in books. I think, you know, so I get in royalties, the royalties from a print book is like 10, sometimes a bit more % from the commercial value of the book, which is about 50% of the price that you pay for it. So if my book is $40, it gets sold to the shop for $20, and I get maybe $2. And it sells like 1,000, 2,000, you know. So like every month I get a little check, and it means that I can go and eat dinner in the restaurant, which is nice, but it is not exactly a living. If you write a much more popular book, maybe a much better book than my book, and if you have like 3 or 4, then maybe you could start to make a living and say, okay, I'll quit my day job. But there's other things that come with it. You know, now I'm famous.
So we love your books. We read it. And how your books have influenced your career?
Yeah, very positively. So
Positively.
I complain there's no money, but like having a book is like having a CV, isn't it? You know, like it's so that's nice. I also O'Reilly would pay for me to go to conferences. You remember, Slava, in the old days when we would go to conferences and like people would go into buildings like together. Strange. So we would go to conferences. And so I went to America, I went to France, I went to there's a private island in France once for a Django con. That was amazing. So like lots of visits, lots of traveling, and yeah, it helps me find work when I'm looking for it. And then people write to you, which is nice, and they say, oh, I like your book, it helped me. Which is a good feeling.
And do you like public speaking?
Yeah. It's not for everyone, but I'm an extrovert, and I like, you know, being a clown. So I enjoy climbing up on stage and doing that. Yeah.
And Harry, how did it change it with this year with COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference, right? This kind of interview. But you know, like since I had children, I can't go to so many conferences anyway. So maybe doing video calls is easier for the next year or so. And yeah. I mean, that's it basically. I can't go and do a book signing in person and give away physical copies, but if anyone would like a free copy of my book, then help yourself. It's on obeythetestingcode.com and cosmicpython.com. They're always free. I believe strongly in well, I think for me it's a nice choice to be able to make the books available for free. So if you decide the Russian translation is no good, you can just read the English version online for free. You don't need to pay.
We have another question in our chat. The question is, often managers, customers don't give time for tests. Maybe they don't understand. how to explain to them that this is essential.
Yeah. Sometimes I was reading, Uncle Bob. He's famous.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not such a nice guy, but he wrote some interesting blog posts and things about TDD. And he has a funny one where he says, just always do TDD because it's always faster. And he goes, always faster, even for small, simple code? Yes, it's faster. But what if it's really just a tiny little thing? It's like, yes, it's faster. Like, what if you were on the Enterprise in space and the captain said you have to change one if statement, otherwise the warp core is going to explode? And are you really going to write a test for that first? Yes. Why? Because it will be faster. And he's exaggerating. But you have one choice, which is so one option is just you refuse. You say this is how I write code. First I write the test, then I write the code. So it's not that you have to give me any time for testing. I'm taking that time. That is part of writing code. And I think it's a question that sort of says, well, if there's no time for testing, it implies that testing is something extra that you do afterwards, instead of something that's an integral, the same thing as development. So that's a bad answer to the question, because if the answer to the question is okay, what the simple answer, Maxim, was it Maxim, is you must tell your boss to fuck off, or your customers that they're idiots. That's not perfect. But what you have to say is it's an investment, right? And like any investment, the payoff is not immediate. The payoff is later. And it's difficult to convince them of that, right? If you're difficult to convince someone, it takes some pain now and we'll save some pain later. And so I think you have to demonstrate it, right? You have to say to that customer or to that boss, all right, let's do an experiment. All right, we won't pick the main project. We'll pick a small project, and we'll do it not for 3 weeks. It has to be a long enough time, right? It has to be 3-4 months. And then we'll just compare this project in 3 or 4 months' time, so that we've had time to do the investment, spend the extra time writing tests, and we get the payback later, which is that later you should have fewer bugs. Later, it's easier to do refactoring. Later, you have an application that's easier to evolve, and you're less scared of making changes. So that's my recommendation that I give to people is, can you find a way of making a small experiment where you can demonstrate the benefits? Because the problem is the benefits are so theoretical. When you say, oh, let's write tests. Why? Oh, it will help us later to find bugs and stuff. And yeah, bullshit, just write the code, because it's imaginary. So if you can get to a way of making it real by having a real life experiment, a small one, maybe that would help.
Great. Harry, we have a couple of minutes left. So I think the final question is, what's your plans for the future?
Well, maybe sometime in the next few years, I have to make a new edition of the testing book, the Goat book, because it's based on Django 1, and we're on Django 3 or something now. I'm not counting. And I think I might split it up. I might make it into 3 books and have a part 1, which is maybe just the Roman numeral example and no Django. And part 2 is Django, and part 3 is kind of advanced. That would be interesting. Maybe make 3 books. And other than that, I think it's continued to build on what I've learned from writing the later book. So learn a bit more about software architecture, and try out some different patterns for tests in the world. And the final thing I want to try is figure out if I can find a way of using hypothesis. You know the hypothesis library?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I used that once 5 years ago or something. It immediately found bugs. And then for some reason, I never touched it again. And I think maybe it has some sweet spots, like things that it's good for and things that it's bad for. And I don't know yet which is which. So that's a little code testing thing I want to do in the next few months.
So we're looking forward to it, Harry. Just for you to know, you have a lot of fans here in Russia. We love your books, we read it, and waiting for new ones. So, Harry, thank you for this meeting. I think it was great, productive, and we invite you back one day to have another meeting. Just come and say, and we organize it.